The day I came back from my buddy's fishing cabin in Montana, I was in a good mood for the first time in months. 3 days off the grid. No emails, no phone signal, no deadlines. Just me, my old college friend Theo, some cold beer, and a river that didn't care about anything either of us had done wrong. I'd been grinding at Westbrook Engineering for 11 years, and my supervisor Felix had finally approved a long weekend off. I remember thinking, driving back on Route 90, that maybe things were turning around. Maybe the worst of it was behind me. I called my wife from a gas station just outside Billings. "Hi, honey, I'm on my way home. Should be back by 8. She said okay in that flat, distracted voice she'd been using for the past few months. The one I'd been telling myself meant she was stressed about her freelance consulting work. I told myself a lot of things back then. I pulled into our neighborhood just after 7:30. The porch light was on. I noticed her car in the driveway, which was normal. What wasn't normal was the second car parked at the curb, a white Lexus I didn't recognize. I figured maybe her sister had stopped by. I grabbed my bag from the trunk, walked up to the front door, and put my key in the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again. Same thing. I stood there for a second, genuinely confused, like maybe I'd somehow grabbed the wrong key. I checked the keychain. No, it was the right one, the one I'd been using for 6 years. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. I knocked. "Hey, it's me. Something's wrong with the lock." A pause. Then her voice, muffled through the door. "I know. I changed it." I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. "Very funny. Open up, I've been driving for 6 hours. I'm not joking, Owen." She never called me by my first name. I felt something cold move through my chest. "There's someone behind you. He has papers for you." I turned around. A man in a gray jacket was walking up the path with a manila envelope. He said my full name like he was reading it off a form. Told me I was being served. Divorce petition, and a temporary restraining order requiring me to stay 200 yards away from my own home. I stood on my own porch holding papers I didn't understand, while my neighbor's living room lights flickered on one by one. I slept in my truck that night, parked at a rest stop off the interstate, tilted my seat back, and stared at the ceiling for about 4 hours before I gave up and just sat there watching the headlights of passing cars. I had $43 in my wallet. Our joint checking account, I found out when I checked my phone at midnight, had a balance of $11 and some change. She'd moved everything out 2 days before I got home. While I was catching trout in Montana, she was cleaning out 6 years of shared finances. In the morning, I went to a diner and ordered coffee and the cheapest thing on a menu and tried to make a list. I'm a structural engineer. I make lists for a living. Usually they help. This one just looked like a record of everything I'd lost. By 9 o'clock, I was calling law firms. Most told me they were booked for weeks. The third one I tried was a solo practice, a guy named Walter Briggs, out of a small office near downtown. His assistant said he could see me at 2. I didn't ask why he had availability on short notice. I just said I'd be there. Walter was in his mid-50s, reading glasses on a chain around his neck, desk covered in yellow legal pads. He listened to everything without interrupting, which I appreciated. Then he laid it out the same way a doctor gives a diagnosis. Straightforward, no softening. In this state, he said, one party wanting a divorce means a divorce happens, period. The restraining order means she's establishing a narrative. The timing of the bank account, the day before you returned, is a pressure move. She wants you financially stressed and legally cornered so you'll sign whatever she puts in front of you quickly. She's been planning this for a while. Probably months. I asked him how he knew it was months. He said, "Restraining orders don't appear overnight. You need an attorney, a petition, a judge's approval. Add to that the lock change, the timing around your trip. She waited until you were as far away as possible." That's not impulsive, that's organized. I sat with that for a minute. The woman who left a Post-it on the coffee maker every morning that said "Good morning" in her loopy handwriting had been planning this like a project with a timeline and deliverables. Walter referred me to an investigator 2 floors up, a guy named Philip Cross, ex-county sheriff's detective, now private practice. Compact guy, late 40s, the kind of person who seems like he's memorizing details about you while you shake his hand. I told him everything. He nodded slowly through most of it. He said, "You want to know why?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I'll tell you within a week." I said, "Please." 3 days later, he called me back. He said, "Don't react until we talk. Come in person." I was staying at an extended stay motel by then, running laundry in the coin machines, eating from a gas station 2 blocks over. I hadn't told anyone at work what was happening. I'd been telling Felix I was dealing with a family situation, which wasn't technically a lie. Philip had his laptop open when I arrived. He turned it around and showed me a still image from what looked like a parking garage camera, a dark green Range Rover, arriving at our house on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks before I left for Montana, staying 4 hours. I asked him who it was. He pressed a key and a LinkedIn profile came up. Director of Operations at a mid-sized tech distribution company based out of the city. Name was Brendan Marsh. I'd met him exactly once at a fundraiser my wife's firm had organized about 8 months earlier. She'd introduced him as a client. I remember shaking his hand. He'd had a firm grip and a very expensive watch. Philip said the Range Rover had shown up at least 9 times in the 4 months prior to my fishing trip. Sometimes midday, sometimes evening, always when I was at work or away. I gripped the edge of his desk and breathed. Philip was watching me the way you watch someone who might fall. He said, "I know what you want to do. Don't." He said, "There's a better way." And he said he wanted to introduce me to someone. The door to the next office had a hand-lettered sign that said, "Senile" and "Noise" in small black letters. Philip knocked twice, opened it without waiting. The office looked like a radio station had a disagreement with a library. Monitors on every surface, whiteboards covered in colored markers, a standing desk with 3 keyboards. A woman about 30 with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead looked up from whatever she was working on. Her name was Zara. She didn't offer a last name and I didn't ask. Philip said she was the best he'd ever worked with on what he called perception management, which I later understood meant she knew how the internet worked, the way a mechanic knows an engine. She said, "Tell me what happened, starting with how you felt, not what happened." I thought that was a strange way to start. I told her anyway. The confusion at the door, the cold feeling in my chest, the humiliation of standing on my own porch while the neighbors watched. She took notes on a legal pad, which seemed old-fashioned given the technology surrounding her, but she wrote fast and didn't look up. When I finished, she said, "Your wife has framed the narrative. You're already the villain in her version. We need to understand what story is being told before we can change it." She pulled up what looked like a private Facebook group, about 800 members, all women, several of whom were friends of my wife. There was a post she'd made 2 weeks earlier. It described a husband who had become emotionally cold, who prioritized work and friends over our marriage, who had made her feel like a stranger in her own home. There were 87 comments, a lot of heart emojis, a lot of "you deserve so much better." I felt something I hadn't felt since the porch, that cold drop in my stomach followed by heat. Zara said, "I know. But right now that anger is not useful. What's useful is that nobody in that group knows what we know." She turned the monitor back toward herself. She said, "Here's how this works. Every story has an arc. Yours right now is at the bottom. We don't fight that. We use it. You have to be willing to go lower before you come back up. Can you do that?" I said I didn't understand. She said, "You will." Over the following week, I barely slept. Felix at work was losing patience. I'd missed 2 project reviews, and the Holbrook Bridge contract we'd been working on for 2 years was entering its final approval phase. I needed to be present, and I couldn't keep my mind in the same room as my body. Then on a Thursday morning, Zara texted me, "It's starting. Stay calm." I opened Reddit on my lunch break and found a post in r Surviving Infidelity that had about 400 upvotes and climbing. It was a write-up, carefully anonymized, no names, no city, about a husband who'd come home from a work trip to find himself locked out, served with papers, and accused publicly of emotional abuse with no evidence. The comments were full of people who recognized the pattern, mostly men, some women, a lot of anger at how easily a restraining order could be used as a weapon. Then there was a follow-up post linking to a short video on a YouTube channel I'd never heard of. Anonymous account. No face shown, just a man's voice. Not mine. Zara had hired a voice actor, telling the story in first person over B-roll footage of suburban streets and courthouses. Calm. Measured. Heartbreaking in the right places. By Friday afternoon, it had 12,000 views. By Monday, it had 61,000. My coworkers started acting strange around Tuesday. I caught 2 of them whispering in the break room and going quiet when I walked in. My assistant sent me a link to a tweet without any message attached. The tweet said, "Anyone else following the locked out husband thing? This guy's wife sounds like a nightmare." 2,000 likes. Felix called me into his office that afternoon. He said he didn't want to pry, but he'd seen some things online and wanted to know if I was okay. I said I was handling it. He nodded slowly, like he was trying to believe me. Then on Wednesday, Zara called and said, "Phase 2. I need you to be ready for it to get worse before it gets better." I said, "How much worse?" She said, "Trust me." The second video went up Thursday. This one was different. Zara had gotten access, through sources I didn't ask about, to a screenshot of my wife's post in that private Facebook group. The video played it on screen, zoomed in, and let viewers read it in full. Then it played it again against what the public record showed. No police reports against me. No documented complaints. Nothing. Just a private post to 800 people designed to preemptively control the story. 60,000 views by Friday. 120,000 by Sunday. My wife called me that Sunday for the first time since the porch. She didn't say hello. She just said, "Who is doing this?" I said, "Doing what?" She hung up. Monday morning, I walked into Westbrook Engineering and was asked to wait in the small conference room near HR. The HR director came in with a sheet of paper. She said the company had received concerns from several employees regarding the social media attention around my personal situation. She said the company had a conduct policy. She said in light of the allegations of emotional misconduct that had circulated, they were placing me on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a review. I said, "What allegations? Where specifically?" She said it would be inappropriate to discuss in detail at this time. I said, "I have been here 11 years. I have never had a formal complaint filed against me. You are suspending me based on a Facebook post that I did not make and that contains no factual basis. I need that on record." She said they were following protocol. A security officer walked me to my desk, watched me collect my personal items, and walked me to the lobby. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes. Then I called Walter Briggs. He picked up on the second ring. He said, "Please tell me you didn't sign anything." I said no. He said, "Good. Now tell me everything." By Tuesday morning, Walter had begun drafting a wrongful termination suit against Westbrook Engineering. He laid out the case the same methodical way he did everything. They suspended you based on unverified social media content. They did not conduct an internal investigation. They did not give you opportunity to respond to the allegations before acting. They violated their own stated HR procedures. He said the number he was going to put on the filing was one that would make their legal team pay attention. He said, $8 million. I blinked. I said, "Can we get that?" He said, "They won't want to find out. My guess is they settle for half." Meanwhile, Zara called to say the third video was ready. She wanted my approval before it went up. I drove to Philip's office. She walked me through it. This one wasn't about me at all. It was about Brendan Marsh. Not the affair, not directly. Zara was careful about that. What she'd found through Philip's research and some digging of her own was that this was not his first involvement with a client's spouse during a professional relationship. There had been a complaint filed 2 years earlier at his previous company, quietly resolved. A former employee of his who was willing to talk on background. A pattern. The video didn't accuse him of anything. It just asked questions. It laid out a timeline. It let viewers draw their own conclusions. I watched it twice and said, "This is something." She said, "It gets better. We're going to run it next to something your wife probably doesn't want people to see." She showed me a county court record. My wife had been married once before. I knew that. What I didn't know was that the divorce from her first husband had never been finalized. She'd filed, the proceedings had started, and then, for reasons the record didn't explain, the case had been marked inactive, not dismissed, not completed, just sitting there, open, for 7 years, which meant our marriage wasn't legal, which meant the divorce petition she'd filed against me was built on a foundation that didn't exist. I had to read it 3 times. Zara let me sit with it. I said, "Does Walter know?" She said, "I was going to ask you that." I called Walter from the parking lot. He went quiet for about 10 seconds. Then he said, "This changes a number of things. Don't discuss it with anyone. Come in tomorrow morning." The fourth video went up on a Friday evening, timed for peak weekend traffic. It covered the incomplete first divorce, carefully framed as a public records question about how such administrative gaps can happen. No accusations, just documentation, just the dates and the case number and the court seal. By Saturday afternoon, my wife's name was searchable. By Sunday evening, her professional website had been screenshot and shared in several comment threads. A journalist from a mid-sized regional news outlet reached out to Zara's anonymous channel asking to discuss the story. My wife called again Sunday night. This time her voice was different, not angry, something quieter and more careful. She said she wanted to meet in person at the house. I said I needed to check with my attorney. Walter said, "Go. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Listen." I drove to the house on a Tuesday afternoon and knocked on my own front door. She answered it like a hostess, like she'd been expecting a guest she was trying to impress. New furniture arrangement in the living room. The house smelled like whatever candles she'd been burning lately. She asked me to sit down. She said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." She said our marriage had gotten off track somewhere and she'd handled things badly. She said the restraining order had been a mistake, that she'd been scared and listening to the wrong people. She said maybe we'd moved too fast. We'd gotten married 14 months after our first date, both coming off difficult stretches, and she'd never dealt with some things she should have dealt with. She said she still cared about me. She said she thought, if we were both willing to try, there was something worth saving. She was crying by the end of it. Real tears, I think. I'm not entirely sure it matters. I let her finish. I waited a beat. I said, "I appreciate you saying all of that." Then I said, "I know about the incomplete divorce from your first marriage." The room went very still. I said, "Walter Briggs knows too, so do a few other people. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to sign whatever we need to sign so I can move forward with my life. That's all I want. I want out. Clean. Fair." She said, "What about everything online?" I said, "That's not something I control." I don't know if that was fully true, but I said it. I left 20 minutes later with signed paperwork authorizing the mutual dissolution process. She didn't say anything as I walked out. I paused on the porch, the same porch, and felt something I couldn't quite name. Not victory. More like a door closing. Zara was waiting in the car at the curb. She'd insisted on driving me. She'd also insisted on keeping a low profile at the meeting, which I found both professional and slightly amusing. I said, "It's done." She said, "I know." "Philip texted me. How do you feel?" I thought about it. I said, like I lost something I didn't know was already gone. She drove for a while without saying anything. Then she said, "That's the most honest thing you've said since we met." In the weeks that followed, Walter settled the wrongful termination case with Westbrook Engineering for $4.2 million plus attorney fees. The non-disclosure was mutual, which was fine with me. The HR director who'd handed me the suspension paper was, I learned through Walter, no longer with the company. I don't know the details, and I didn't ask. The question of my wife's first marriage was eventually resolved by the courts. Turns out the inactive case had a procedural error on the filing side that had been overlooked for years, not anything intentional on her part. Our marriage was retroactively recognized, which simplified the dissolution. Walter handled all of it. I signed where he told me to sign. Brendan Marsh lost his directorship around the same time his company was acquired, and the new leadership cleaned house. Whether that was connected to anything Zara had put into circulation, I genuinely don't know. I stopped following it. What I do know is that 6 months later, I was sitting in an apartment in Portland, Oregon with my dog, a lease, and a job offer from a civil engineering firm that had reached out through LinkedIn after the case got some quiet attention in professional circles. The apartment had big north-facing windows. I'd bought a coffee maker and some decent furniture and started cooking actual meals instead of gas station sandwiches. Zara had moved her practice to Seattle the month before. We'd been talking most days for a while by then, first about the case, then about other things. The way conversations shift when you've been through something complicated together. She came down to Portland on a Saturday and we walked along the waterfront and talked until the light changed and neither of us wanted to stop. I bought 2 cups of coffee from a cart and handed her one, and she said, for someone who spent most of a year being the internet's most pitied accountant. I said, "Structural engineer." She said, "Sorry, structural engineer." She seemed remarkably okay. I said, "I have some help." She looked at me. There was a moment where we both understood what was actually being said. She said, "I'm not that easy." I said, "I know. I've been paying attention." She smiled at that. It was a kind of smile that takes a while. I don't have a clean way to wrap this up, because life doesn't work that way. My ex-wife eventually left the city. I heard through Walter's office that she'd relocated somewhere in the Southwest. I genuinely hope she figured out whatever it was she was trying to figure out. I don't think she was a purely calculating person. I think she was scared and made a series of decisions that spiraled, and she had someone in her ear who made it worse. That doesn't make what she did okay, but it makes it something I can set down. The fishing rod I'd taken to Montana is still in my truck. I haven't used it since, but I keep it there. Every time I see it, I think about the drive home on Route 90, the mood I was in, the certainty I had that things were turning around. Turns out I wasn't wrong. I was just off by about a year. I've thought a lot about what actually saved me through all of it, and I keep coming back to the same thing. It wasn't the lawsuit, it wasn't the settlement, it wasn't even Zara's videos. It was the decision, made in a gas station diner with $43 in my wallet, to not react the way I felt like reacting. That's harder than it sounds. When Philip showed me those camera stills, the Range Rover pulling into my driveway 9 times while I was at work, I wanted to drive straight to Brendan Marsh's office and make a scene that would follow both of us for years. That impulse was honest. It was also exactly what my wife was counting on. A man who acts from rage hands his opponent the story. He becomes the proof of every accusation that was never true. What I learned, the hard way, over months I wouldn't wish on anyone, is that integrity under pressure isn't a virtue you perform for other people. It's a practical tool. When Walter walked into that negotiation with Westbrook Engineering, the reason he could demand $4.2 million was because I hadn't done anything wrong. Not on the porch, not in the parking lot, not in my wife's living room when she was crying and asking me to come back. I'd been, for once in my life, strategically decent. And decency, it turns out, compounds. The intelligence part of it was Zara's department, and I want to be honest about what that looked like. It wasn't manipulation in the way people mean when they use that word as an accusation. It was documentation. It was patience. It was understanding that the truth on its own doesn't travel very far. You have to give it somewhere to go. My wife had understood that instinctively, which is why she'd seeded that private Facebook group 2 weeks before I even got home from Montana. She knew the story she told first was the one that would stick. What Zara did was simply tell a different story, backed by public records and timestamps, and let people decide. The resilience part, the getting through it, that one I had to find mostly on my own. Sleeping in a truck, running laundry in a coin machine, eating gas station sandwiches for weeks. There's no strategy for that phase. You just keep showing up. You make the next phone call, you sit in the next waiting room, you sign the next form. You don't collapse, not because you're strong in some cinematic way, but because collapsing doesn't actually solve the problem in front of you. I think about Owen from 6 months before the fishing trip sometimes. That guy was comfortable in a way that made him incurious. He didn't ask the right questions. He took the post-it notes at face value. Comfort has a cost, and the cost is usually that you stop paying attention to what's actually happening around you. I'm not comfortable now, exactly. But I'm awake in a way I wasn't before. That feels like the trade I made. Everything I lost for the ability to actually see what's in front of me. I'll take it.